First up tonight, we have Danielle Evans. Danielle is the author of Before You Suffocate Your Own Fool Self, winner of the 2011 Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize, and the New York Times book review said of her words that it amplifies the universal pitfalls of coming of age in 21st century America. Ladies and gentlemen, Danielle Evans.
Hello. Is this working? Because if there's a way to use the microphone wrong, I will do it. Okay, yay. So I thought it was appropriate, since the event was Metamorphosis, that I'd read something new that is both about transition and also like in transition itself. So I'm actually reading from the novel that I'm working on, which is called The Empire Has No Clothes. This section that I'm about to read is from like the third chapter of the novel, so I think all you need to know is that Cora, who's mentioned in this section, has just taken a job teaching progressive history at a charter school in DC. If you don't know what that means, that's okay, because she doesn't either, which is kind of the purpose of this section. Which is, she's just gotten into it. She's sort of doing this exploratory thing about how much of history she personally remembers, and has gotten into an argument with her younger sister over whether or not she actually remembers the things she's just claimed to. So, the truth was, Cora did remember the Berlin Wall falling and the Challenger exploding too. It seemed to her that the whole history of everything since she'd been born was the history of falling explosions, of things collapsing or disintegrating under their own weight. She'd been born near the start of 1984, already a bad omen in some circles. It was the year the boy in the bubble died, the year the government took up illegal arms dealing in Nicaragua. All of this was a swirling cloud of dust above the atmosphere. In the years that followed, the Challenger had exploded, the Berlin Wall had fallen, the Soviet Union had fallen apart, unions and alliances worldwide followed suit and exploded into endless wars and half-hearted peace processes, which fell apart too. Somewhere off the coast of Alaska, an oil tanker ran aground, sticky black liquid threatening the planet itself. Bombs fell, and the moral high ground, if there ever had been one anywhere, fell into oblivion as every movement that had ever promised anything past its own survival fell apart, imploded, exploded, took with it people who disappeared from the national consciousness like that. The year Cora started college, the World Trade Center fell brutally, the skyline itself was not stable, and it seemed she was still blinking back the memory of dust clouds when bombs began falling and exploding over Afghanistan, then over Iraq. The year she graduated, a whole city sank underwater as nature demonstrated it could outdo man's damage, not that man was helping much. And Cora thought then what she thought many times before, that the central question of her lifetime would be how to make whole and permanent what was faltering and determined to destroy itself. Nisi, Cora knew, would have laughed at all of this. Not because she was cruel, but because the very thought of permanence was laughable. Nisi remembered growth, expansion, life spiraling out of control, the constant reminder that everything was mutable in ways one could only begin to imagine. The words and the logos and the terms kept changing, but the change itself was the constant, old things remixed and remade before the originals themselves had stopped being new. Nisi remembered fields turning into houses, turning into whole neighborhoods around her. She remembered discovering computers at 5 and by 8 being unable to imagine life without the internet. She learned of sex and AIDS at the same time. Life and death were not opposite for her, but symbiotic. She'd entered middle school through doors gated with metal detectors, and knew kids who spent lunch break in the bathroom trying to build low-grade explosives out of Wrigley's gum wrappers in an attempt to get around them. She remembered virtual reality, artificial life, and the discovery of cloning. Remembered the teacher wheeling a TV into homerooms so they could all stare at Dolly the sheep, learning that her mutated cells grew twice as fast, cutting her lifespan in half, and thinking, so that's the price of growth, the price but not the limit. The end was an impossibility. Life was, if nothing else, cruelly, destructively resourceful. A good historian or sociologist, or a bad one with a strong agenda, might have made much of the decade between them. The 80s, the internet, Bill Clinton, terrorism, Britney Spears, the rapid growth and sudden decline of late-stage capitalism might all have been stretched to make the difference quite meaningful. A good mystic might have looked in their eyes and known instantly this was not a difference of 10 years, but a difference of millennia, a difference between souls evolved throughout the ages. That the distance in Nisi's eyes was saturated, the distance of a girl begging for a blank slate, where the distance in Cora's was that of a reluctant atheist in search of a viable God, a distance holding open space. Perhaps it was some karmic law of the universe that demanded that one family member compensate for For another, just the nature of things that made it so that everywhere Nisi had closed, Cora had opened. But the great advance of modern psychology was to make mysticism unnecessary, and given 5 minutes, a halfway decent therapist could have explained, without the aid of magic as such, or history as such, why Cora was struggling to articulate the personal and political meaning of the Iran-Contra affair, and Nisi was stretched out on her bed wearing 1 year's worth of headphones, half watching a reality TV show involving people dressed as pirates, and half listening to an angry teenage singer shouting, "Fuck your television." It starts like this. In 1982, Lisa and Robert Anderson Wallace, newly degreed, newly hyphenated, happily married, and leaving New York City for the promise of the D.C. suburbs. This, no doubt, was progress with a capital P. The Souls of Black Folk was not yet required reading for Ivy League students. They were heedless of Du Bois's warning that progress is necessarily ugly. Progress for them took the form of a neatly furnished garden apartment in a neighborhood with good schools and playgrounds everywhere. The manager who'd first showed them the complex pointed out the classy beige brick of their apartment in contrast with the dark red project brick of the complex next door. They had a TV, a VCR, a microwave, a small gray car that they parked at the Metro each morning before venturing to their respective law offices, and then suddenly, unexpectedly, a baby girl. Baby girl, otherwise known as Cora, otherwise known as Care Bear, was loved, doted on, expected to prove the success of this experiment in transcending race and class. By 3, she seemed well on track for destiny. She could read, recite a concise history of the civil rights movement, and hold her own on a playground. Disaster had threatened but once in the form of her grandmother, who, having just completed what would turn out to be her last major stage role, had borrowed her granddaughter for the wrap party, an adventure that 2.5-year-old Cora found breathtakingly exciting, but her parents found cause for borrowing her grandmother from the house indefinitely. Daddy and Mama, whose whole life plan short of effective parenthood had been achieved by age 29, learned that success made them no less strangers. They found themselves nodding politely at office picnics and neighborhood barbecues, wondering where the hell these people had come from and where they had been when the two of them were growing up in New York tenements. They'd always imagined that if they had what these people had, they would make better use of it. They would not fall victim to the phenomenon of inventing problems in the absence of real ones. But eventually they came to something in each other they couldn't fill up, fill in, make better. Oh, they loved each other, always would a little bit, but it is no consolation that love is often not enough. So by the time Cora was 9, her father was packing his things for a job transfer in California, a trial separation they called it, knowing full well they had stopped trying, given up, and that separation was too soft a word for it. Mama was left with an unhappy 9-year-old and a barely conceived baby who might have saved her parents' marriage had she announced her presence sooner. It wasn't Nisi's fault exactly, but the ill timing of her conception was something all of them would always hold against her. When Cora was born, her father had taken her out to the balcony of their 3rd-story garden apartment and held her up to the sun as if they were starring in their own personal version of Roots. Mama stood beside him, minding him to be careful with her baby. Behold, her father had said, the only thing greater than yourself. When Nisi was born, she'd been colicky and cried all night every night, and Mama joked to a friend that maybe she could return the baby to the Trojan condom company whose fault she was anyway. She thought Cora was sleeping at the time, and when at school the next day, Cora asked the teacher what the Trojan condom company was and whether they really took kids away. The teacher had called Mama, and Mama had come to get her early and said, listen, forget I said anything like that, it wasn't funny, which Cora hadn't known it was supposed to be. Cora was feeling the world fall out from under her, adjusting to her father's reincarnation as a voice on the other end of a telephone line, to the coming and going of her grandmother, still an actress, still holding hope out at 50 that her career was yet to peak, to her mother's suddenly apparent impending nervous breakdown. She was unsurprised, but still unprepared the day her mother took them for a drive, with Nisi whimpering in the back seat and Cora front seat face forward. The car, then older than Cora, began to sputter. The wheels dragged along the August pavement of the Beltway. Cora gulped humid air out of the open window, the AC having gone the year before, and let herself be jerked forward as the car stopped short. Traffic whizzed by, gleaming sports cars and dusty minivans. Behind them, cars screeched to a halt. The drivers honked and shouted and cursed before swerving around them. Mama sat there, her hands helplessly gripping the steering wheel. Her breath, coming in short bursts, felt like the loudest thing Cora had ever heard, louder even than Nisi crying from the back seat. Baby, I'm sorry. Mommy's so sorry. What do I do now? What do I do? Cora firmly believed that somewhere in her then 10 years she'd been handed the answer to this question, that the right words would have put everything together again. But she was, at that moment, at a loss, overwhelmed, afraid to open her mouth and cry herself. So she blinked and swallowed while Nisi cried, her mother heaved, and traffic sped by them, a head or two turning and briefly wondering if they needed any help. Eventually, a passerby got them home safely, and a tow truck got their car to the junkyard, and it was this image, the picture of the car they'd driven in only that afternoon, being crushed under a wrecker's ball that evening, that finally set Cora crying. She crawled under the bed, inhaling the carpet, poking her finger against the metal of the bed frame, and stared at the crossed metal wires until they seemed to be falling toward her. She believed that everything above her would fall with them. Having inherited from the women in her family a misuse of melodrama, she remained firmly convinced that the whole series of bad things happening in the universe was directed at her specifically, that disaster everywhere and anywhere was a personal affront, a challenge, a warning. You are not safe. Now what? Thank you.